All right, and welcome to the Ourlads Depth Charts Show. I am your host, the Baron of Banter, Ryan McKee, and I am joined by the Prince of Punters, Cory Henke, and the Duke of Depth Charts, Tucker Moss. We're diving into the NFL depth charts, uncovering hidden gems, and providing fresh perspectives across the league. Let's get started, guys. How's it going?
Going good. Thanks, Ryan.
Fantastic. I love the titles.
Thank you. Yeah, I spent a lot of time on those, so glad you guys noticed. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we are back today. We are going to be going around the league and looking into the news that's happened the last week or so, some of the depth chart changes, some signings. We'll talk about it all from a depth chart perspective, what that means for the team. And then we're going to take a deep dive into two teams' depth charts, the Commanders and the Chargers, to look at how the new coaches are kind of remaking those teams in their own image. And we'll pepper Tucker with questions on those depth charts. But let's get started with around the league, some news that happened. John Ross has announced that he is coming back from retirement. Tucker, is this even something that should be on our radar? I know that the Eagles have signed him, but he never had more than 28 catches in a season. And his last season for the Giants, he only had 11 catches. So does this even matter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think it matters that much. Like, he'll just kind of be an end of the depth chart in the wide receiver room. I mean, he's fun though because he's so fast. But he's had so many issues staying healthy throughout his career, which is why he retired so early. But there is room that opened up though with Devontae Parker retiring. They have a really top heavy room with just AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. Behind them, it's anyone's guess who will be like the number 3 starter and who will be the backups who make the roster. So he certainly has a better chance on this team, but I still would say that he's near the end of the pecking order.
Yeah, you mentioned Devontae Parker retired, played 9 seasons in the NFL, 7 with Miami, 2 with New England. Another guy who always had trouble staying healthy. He never had more than 58 catches in a season, and that was the only time he played 16 games. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of ironic that he's replacing Parker on the roster.
Yeah, guys getting injured all the time. From a depth chart perspective, should we look at the Eagles? Like, what do you have there?
Like the wide receiver room, or?
Yeah, should we look at the wide receiver room? Cory, do you have any questions for Tucker on this?
No, I think that Johnny Wilson coming on brings a little bit of experience to the room. You know, they still got some young receivers there. There should be a fantastic addition to the room. He's a big receiver too.
They needed size. That's the main thing. Like, I mean, their biggest, I think, was just AJ Brown is 6'1.5". So Johnny Wilson is 6'6". So he kind of they didn't have anyone above 6'1", 6'2". Usually teams like to have like a guy who's like a 6'4" receiver.
And I think Aeneas Smith is really interesting there as well. The wide receiver they took in the 5th round this year. So both Aeneas Smith and Johnny Wilson could get some real playing time. They just got to battle Paris Campbell,
which it wouldn't be a stretch to say that it's very possible for Smith to be a starter if he wins that competition, because Paris Campbell hasn't really been great. Like, he was pretty end of the roster last year on the Giants, and they don't have a good receiving core. So it's a pretty ideal spot to end up as a rookie. So I'm excited to see who ends up winning that competition.
Yeah. It should be interesting. All right, moving on to the rest of around the league. We had a Jalen Waddle 3-year contract extension, 84.75 million. I mean, this is interesting because starting next year, the Dolphins will have over 50 million per year tied up in 2 receivers with Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and they have to decide whether they'll pay Tua after this season. Am I right?
Yeah, it was kind of unexpected because it was thought that they were working on the Tua contract first. So people were surprised when they saw it was Waddle's that ended up done first. I think it makes sense because of all the receivers that need to get paid. They wanted to get ahead of it, which I think is smart because there's guys like Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They all need to get contracts, and so it's only going to go up more and more the amount that they expect to get. So it makes sense because Tyreek Hill is 30 now, and obviously he's still elite, but there's like rumor that he could retire in a couple of years. I think in 2026 he has a $56 million cap hit in 2026.
Yeah,
so
that is true.
It's expected that either he gets cut or retires, or they restructure that. Because I don't know if it's likely that he'll be on the team in 26. So it makes sense to have Waddle as their future one going forward. And also, we were talking about the Eagles, and they're kind of similar. They just signed Devontae Smith to a contract too, and they already have AJ Brown under contract. So it's not too out of the question to have 2 receivers that you're paying, but it makes sense here, I think, because of Tyreek Hill's age.
It makes sense here with the way the league is going too, right? As well as just continuing being a more passing heavy league. I don't know. It just seems interesting that they decided to do that deal before Tua's deal. I don't know that says that maybe they're having second thoughts on Tua. What do you think, Cory?
I don't know if it's necessarily backwards as much as it's investing in what the tools and resources Tua needs to be successful. Having 2 premier receivers to throw to, I think, would be attractive, for Tua to be able to throw to those guys. I thought I read that it was $76 million guaranteed to Jalen Waddle. Was that accurate, Tucker? Do you know?
I didn't realize it was that high, but
I didn't realize that the guaranteed money was that high either. But it's kind of the way contracts are going, is like much higher guaranteed amounts. But I think it makes sense, and it'll look even better when we see guys like Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb sign contracts, because they're going to be pretty crazy.
I don't know if that's necessarily great. I've been reading everywhere the Justin Jefferson rumors. That this doesn't make me overly excited to see Justin leave the Vikings, but for him, it's got to be good seeing that how high the contracts are going. And he's, in my humble opinion, I believe he's better than Jalen. So the market only continues to go up for him.
Tucker, in your opinion, sticking with the Dolphins wide receiver room, does that make some of their rookies more enticing, like Malik Washington, just because they don't have to pay them as much as some of these other players? I know they got Odell Beckham Jr. on a pretty reasonable contract.
They're kind of doing this. They have a similar strategy right now as the Eagles, where they have 2 really good top receivers, but then behind them it's pretty open. They have a wide rotation of guys they've been using as their third. Like last year it was Cedric Wilson and River Craycraft, and Braxton Berrios were kind of just rotating. Like guys like Malik Washington, Taj Washington, they'll have a good chance, especially because they offer a return ability in the punt return game and the new kick return game as well. So they have plenty of room behind those top 2 guys for sure.
Cory mentioned how it makes sense to invest in tools for Tua before doing Tua's contract. Is there any chance that we start knowing the wide receivers as Tua's tools? See what I did there? Tua's tools. Hello, guys. Well, we got one viewer. That's what that's what got our over the top there. Tua's tools. There we go. All right.
Leave a comment.
Moving on to the next round. Oh, we lost that viewer. Okay. Going on to the next bit of news that I read and around the league. Justin Fields is open to being a gadget player. He has said in the vein of Cordell Stewart, that was referenced in the NFL.com article. This also seems like kind of a Taysom Hill type of role that he could be entering into. What do you think about Justin Fields as a gadget player, Corey?
Yeah. Well, I did. I don't know if I sent that to you or to Tucker, that I said I think we could see some of Justin Fields running more.
Yeah.
I have a childhood best friend. Give a shout out to Joe Cousin. Tell me that he thought that Justin Fields could be a Cordell Stewart directly, and he just slashed the Vikings late in games when I actually went and saw him run wild all over the Vikings. So I can totally see that. I can totally see him in the backfield doing some gadget plays, some RPO type of schemes. And I think that would fit well into the AFC East. You know, I think the AFC East has a plethora of, just thinking.
Are you talking about the AFC North?
AFC North. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No worries.
Yes. North. And I can totally see that going down out there. That for sure.
What do you think, Tucker? What do you see him as a gadget player? I mean, is this interesting for fantasy at all?
If it's legitimate, yeah. I think it was like a quote from like the special teams coordinator, right? Is that what this started?
Yeah,
with?
it was on NFL.com. And they told, So
I know recently
they asked both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields about it, and they both said that it sounded interesting. They didn't shoot it down.
Gotcha.
I know Fields said he's still focused on trying to win the starting job, obviously. But
I saw Fields was asked about being a kickoff returner like 2 days ago or yesterday. So that would be really interesting. But he said he's not. He said he's not going to be a kick returner. So he shot that one down.
I feel like that would be putting him in harm's way a little too much. But
we could have a Tennessee Music Miracle or however they called that, throwing it back there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, with the new kickoff rules, who knows? But I mean, Taysom does sometimes, but yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I'm not sure. It's kind of tough because you kind of like the Saints can use Taysom that way because they have another guy. They have other guys behind. Like they drafted Spencer Rattler to be like a backup too. But like the Steelers don't really have. They just have Kyle Allen, and then they have the Plumlee from Central Florida, undrafted free agent. So it's like you kind of. It'd be dangerous to be using your backup, I guess, in that way if you don't have a third that's like that knows the offense well. If
that's
you know what
interesting.
I mean. So,
yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
If Russell struggles and then you want to put Fields in, then you can't really all those packages that you had Fields being kind of a utility player. You need to either replace it or they're just scrapped, entirely. So it's kind of tricky to have a player like that. But it would be fun to see, though. That's for sure. I would like to see it.
Yeah, I think it gives the defense something else to prepare for, which that in itself is worth something.
Well, and it goes to show we talked on across our shows how the Steelers don't have much of a wide receiving depth, and that they should focus on the run this year behind Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, two very talented running backs. They also just added LaMichael Pirine, right, Tucker, to that running back competition for the depth. So maybe we're seeing a Steelers team that is going to focus more on the run this year, and that might help with Justin Fields
and tight ends as well. It's all of Arthur Smith's stuff that he's done in Atlanta and Tennessee, where I wouldn't be surprised if they ran a lot of two tight ends like with Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington, and then behind them Connor Hayward's kind of a fullback hybrid guy, and then Michael Pruitt has been with Arthur Smith like his whole career. But yeah, they brought in LaMichael Pirine and Jonathan Ward recently to compete there. They have Cordero Patterson too, who can kind of be a fun gadgety player as well. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if later on, like I wouldn't be surprised if the depth chart ends up changing to show only 2 receivers and then 2 tight ends. It just kind of depends on how they end up, like what players they end up keeping, and then we'll see obviously week 1 what they do. But it certainly looks more run focused, especially with how they address the O-line so hard with their first and second round picks, both being on O-line and also as well as the 4th round. So yeah, I mean, their offense is going to be completely different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, something to keep in mind when in fantasy, Arthur Smith kind of pissed off a lot of fantasy players, right? With the way he used Drake London, or the lack thereof, or Kyle Pitts receiving wise. And so that is something to keep in mind if you are thinking of drafting George Pickens on your team. Is, while a very talented receiver, if Arthur Smith gets his vision of a running heavy team, we might not see a lot of targets for Pickens.
Yeah, I'm somewhat of an Arthur Smith defender, but he certainly wasn't. They weren't ideal last year. Like with the Bijan usage was questionable for sure. But I defend the receiving usage because they got plenty of chances. Like it's just the quarterbacks were so terrible. Like Pitts' rookie year was with Matt Ryan, and he was great. He had a great rookie season. I think he was a Pro Bowler. He got 1,000 yards. But then after that, it's been Mariota and Ritter, and also Pitts had that major injury. And so there's been plenty of, like, they're getting plenty of targets, but a lot of the time the balls are just not catchable. Like they're not even remotely near them.
Right.
I think that this year will be really exciting because they have a quarterback now. But that being said, I understand the apprehension around Arthur Smith just because of that. But I think that he'll do a better job with. I think Russell Wilson or Justin Fields are better than Mariota or Ritter.
Yeah.
Well, Pickens was a kind of a bust some games. He had a couple of games over 100 yards and a lot of games under 40 yards. So it's kind of, hit
a little boomer bust.
Yeah,
he kind of had a similar issue too, because he had Kenny Pickett, who was like one of the worst quarterbacks. Yeah, so it's we'll see. But Pickens is a really talented player.
Absolutely. All right, what else can you tell us on depth charts updates from the last couple of weeks or so that we should be mindful of before we wrap up this segment?
Yeah. So you mentioned the Steelers grabbing 2 running backs, so they're just going to compete probably behind Cordero. I mean, we'll see how many. Usually teams keep like 2 or 3 or 4. So that there's today was, or Dalton Reisner was re-signed by the Vikings yesterday, which was important. I don't know why they didn't sign him earlier, but he was their left guard last year and he was pretty solid. And so that was a good re-signing to make because it was just going to be Rick Brindell, who's been their like backup interior lineman for the last several years. So it looks a lot better now that Reisner's back.
And that's Cory's team. Cory, you have any questions for Tucker on Minnesota re-signing Reisner?
No. I just kind of want to see. We'll see how it plays out. These early OTAs, are they about done with OTAs? Don't they have that? Isn't that complete? Is this the last week for the OTAs for May?
I think the first week end. Is that what happened? I know like the rookie mini camp ended, and then they've been doing OTAs like now. I think it says late April, and then June is mandatory. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's May 30th now. Yeah, I guess those are over now. But
all right.
I think in like a week or so they start up again. So, but yeah, it'll be fun because we get to see like how teams use players, and where they're lining up, especially for like O-line stuff like that. Guys who are like hybrid players, it's kind of tough to guess what the team is going to do unless the coach has been asked by a reporter. So it makes my job a lot easier when I get to see practices and see where guys are lining up.
Yeah.
Well, I think when they get done with the OTAs and more into the mini camps, I think we'll see a lot more movement. I mean, the OTAs do get some veterans to come in, especially with all the head coaching changes. You're seeing more players in the OTAs. But I think we'll really see some movements on these Duke charts once we start getting into the mini camps.
Only you call them Duke charts, by the way, Corey. Everybody
Well,
else call them depth charts, but I do like how you go with the Duke of depth charts, Tucker Moss Duke charts. But
yeah.
just so people know what Corey is talking about when he says Duke charts, he's not talking about like a Dookie chart or something like that. He's talking about the depth charts in a new way.
That's right. Depth charts delivered in a new way every day, all day.
Right. And can you tell people how they can get our Ourlads Depth Charts update file if they want to get all the latest
updates? You know, this is going to be a new product that's coming out for Ourlads this year. And what you see on the screen right now is what is called the Ourlads Depth Chart updates. But in the world of marketing, we're going to call it the Duke Charts, coming to you every day, all day by Tucker Moss. But yes, you can reach out to us at team@ourlads.com. And
it's on the screen lower behind there. So if you want to email us, go ahead.
Yeah. If you want to email us, and we will sign you up for this. This will is getting formatted right now, which will be in a much more visually appealing. But right now, this is just raw and gritty, and we've done the research. We can't find anything like this online as up to date as our depth charts are. And for $14.99, you can get this for an entire year, and it will be delivered to you.
What a steal!
It is a steal, and be able to click on it and make it get alerts every day. And what we like about it is it keeps you up to date, informed with what truly matters, and those are the players that are on the field.
Awesome. Well, let's get to our next segment so we keep things moving along. We got to talk about the Commanders, right? So why are we picking the Commanders to talk about, Corey, in this next segment?
Well, we got a new head coach there with Dan Quinn, new ownership. It's really a new beginning for the Commanders. And it's always interesting to see new coaching staffs form. And obviously the Commanders were coming off less than a stellar season, and they're bringing in a head coach that does have, I would consider, a strong resume. Not every coach in the NFL can make it to the Super Bowl. So he's pulling together his staff and pulling together teams. And they've got what Dan Shanka is predicting as the rookie of the year in Jaden Daniels. So it's going to be interesting to see how they come out of the gates. And, the NFC East is interesting this year. Some would say it's the Eagles to take for sure. And that's where I tend to put my chips. But I also believe that we may see a playoff team come out of the AFC East, and some think it could potentially be a wild card from the Commanders.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, as you mentioned, Dan Quinn does have a lot of professional head coaching success, 43-42 in the regular season, 3-2 in the playoffs when he served as the head coach for the Falcons from 2015 to 2020. He led the Falcons to the Super Bowl in the 2016 season, where, sorry, Tucker, they infamously lost after giving up a 28-3 lead to the Patriots. So after his time with the Falcons, he became the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys for 2 seasons, and before being named as the head coach. And we wanted to look at how a depth chart might be being remade in the coach's image, right, Tucker? Like what are the main changes that Smith that he's already made?
Yeah, certainly.
Quinn. Sorry, I said Smith. I meant Quinn.
No worries. When there's a new head coach, the roster overhaul is immense usually, because they want to bring in all their guys they're familiar with when they're putting in their new systems. Also, like all the new coaches they're bringing in want to bring in their guys. Also they have a new GM too, so that adds to it as well. There's really not much from the previous regime that remains. So a lot of guys that he brought in, he was familiar with. The defense especially is where they addressed like crazy. So they traded away Montez Sweat and Chase Young last year. So their edge rushers were pretty thin. So that's where they got Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler, both from the Cowboys, who were kind of rotational guys for them on the edge, who obviously Quinn is familiar with. Fowler was also on the Falcons as well. And then they brought in Bobby Wagner from when Quinn was the Seahawks defensive coordinator during the Legion of Boom. So Wagner will be huge for them too. They also got his other old defensive coordinator Ken Norton Jr. too, who was he was a DC for Seattle after Quinn. So I know Bobby Wagner's really happy to be back with his old coaches. And then on offense, they also brought
How
in.
old is Bobby Wagner now? He's got to be getting up there, right?
Yeah, he's 33. So I mean, he's still pretty good though. Like it's
you don't see middle linebackers necessarily go much past their mid 30s though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's going to play for 5 more years, but
yeah,
at least just for this year, I feel like he's a good guy to have, especially as a leader, to bring up the younger linebackers and to help Dan Quinn kind of lead these guys to a whole new era. And besides that, though, on offense, they also brought in Olamide Zaccheaus, who was on the Falcons with Quinn, and Tyler Biadasz, the center from the Cowboys as well. And they also got their defensive coordinator, Joe Witt, is also from the Cowboys, who I think the Cowboys wanted to get him for their defensive coordinator to replace Quinn, but he ended up opting to go with Quinn to Washington. So, yeah, there's just a lot of – they brought in a lot of guys.
You could see all of the orange names on defense. They drafted heavy on defense as well, right? Like after taking Jaden Daniels in the first round, they took Jerzon Newton and I can't say his last name, Mike Sanskrit.
San Rasil,
the nickelback. So it is interesting that they went all in on drafting a lot of defensive players.
Yeah, defense had a lot of holes. Whereas, I mean, I'm interested to see how well Jaden Daniels does, like with not a perfect situation, around him. But I feel like with having Terry McLaurin, having Austin Eckler coming in, they also have Austin Eckler's old head coach, Anthony Lynn, Brian Robinson, drafting Luke McCaffrey, who the GM Adam Peters is from San Francisco, so he heard a lot about Luke McCaffrey from his brother. So there's a lot of kind of familiarity on this team, and I'm excited to see how well they do, because like you said, the East is pretty open. Like yesterday on the gambling show, we were talking about Washington as a pretty nice bet for playoffs, just given how low their odds are, because having a quarterback like Jaden Daniels really changes the outlook of it.
That's right.
It's such a wild card though with the rookie quarterback. Jaden Daniels is just
especially one that runs so much and can get injured.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's see how he can slide. That will be a huge indicator. I don't know. I think that Mark Lawrence had him at 6.5 wins. So to see him go to playoffs is a big jump, but I believe it's truly just based on how well he grasps the Cliff Kingsbury's air raid type scheme and how they have that run pass ratio dialed in, to hopefully alleviate some pressure. I can see Jaden being more of someone that comes out and makes plays as opposed to be requiring him to make plays, if that makes sense.
They're at plus 260 on DraftKings to make the playoffs. So that is an interesting bet. We were talking about the teams to make the playoffs a little bit yesterday. Anything else, Tucker? We did notice when we were kind of going over this, we talked about how they have a new GM in Adam Peters as well. And we were trying to find a Cliff Kingsbury connection to Dan Quinn. And it's not so much a Dan Quinn connection, it's an Adam Peters connection. He was actually a scout for the Patriots the last year that Kingsbury was there playing on that team as a backup. So maybe that's the connection there. Yeah. Could be one of the connections but it is like all who in the NFL, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the connections. I think also a lot of the time you see teams, a lot of teams in the same division signing players, like the Vikings just signed Robert Tonyan from Green Bay, or the Vikings had Brett Favre, stuff like that. Teams do that all the time because they're so familiar with those players.
They play against them a couple times a year.
Yeah. And so Kingsbury was the Cardinals head coach. So Adam Peters would have known him as a rival back then. So they could have had some connection there as well.
With the 49ers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator at Florida and went against Cliff Kingsbury when he was the OC at Texas A&M and barely squeaked that one out 20-17. So there's probably some formidable head-to-head respect there.
That's why he got Dante Fowler too. Fowler is someone he's loved forever because Fowler went to Florida, and then he was drafted by Seattle, and then he was able to get him in Atlanta, and then Cowboys, and now brought him here. So Quinn and Fowler are together forever.
Dan Quinn too he's a locker room guy. They always say coaches are locker room guy. I mean, Dan Quinn is building a coach's tree. He's had Mike McDaniels, he's had Rasheed Morris underneath him, he had Kyle Shanahan underneath him, and he had Matt LaFleur underneath him too. So he definitely has shown ability to let the coaches coach and help promote them to go on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Were you a locker room guy as a player at Northern Iowa, Cory?
As a punter, I think it's predicated that you have to be a locker room guy. What can I get you? You're like more one of those guys. I think everyone's got a brother or sister that says, while you're up. As a punter, you just really want to be forward thinking. Like, hey, I'm getting up. Does anybody want something?
Yeah.
More along the lines of that. You want to be seen, not heard.
Yeah, I've heard in interviews that punters are kind of one of the cool guys in the locker room, whereas kickers tend to be a little weird.
I would probably say
a little too in their head.
I can't comment on that. I'd have to say it comes down to the individual. But I would say my only complaint would be that, punters are people too. We never really get rooted onto the field, and it's like, hey, I went through summer conditioning too. I know it's fourth down. I know this stinks, but let's cheer the punters on out there, and
maybe we should make t-shirts for our lads that say punters are people too. I would buy one of those.
I think that would work. I even think in my own personal good games, the coaches are like, yeah, and Cory, yeah, I mean, he did well. He had a couple of punts, blah, 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 because they're not even happy about it. It's the statistics. It's just so hard to get excited about when you're a coach,
Yeah.
So. Hey, if you have somebody like Belichick, I mean, he loves that. So just depends on the guy you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to talking about the Chargers because they have a new head coach as well in Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh, a very successful coach for the 49ers, NFL head coaching career record of 49, 22, and 1, and an NCAA head coaching record of 133 and 52. So those are some pretty amazing numbers. And if you go back to the 49ers first season, they were expected to struggle when he came in as their head coach. It was going to be a rebuilding season, a lot kind of like the Chargers are having a bit of a rebuild as well. And Harbaugh led that team to a 13-3 regular season winning the NFC West and going to the NFC Championship game in his first year. So the Chargers shouldn't, be excluded from having a lot of success this year just because they have a new head coach and they're going through somewhat of a rebuild. But let's take a look at their depth chart, Tucker, and tell us what some of the main changes that Harbaugh has already made here.
Yeah, so Washington had a lot of cap space to work with, which allowed Quinn and the new regime to kind of instill their new what their new team, what they wanted to look like. But the Chargers had a big problem with that because they had no cap space. They had actually negative 28 million cap space. So they had to clear quite a few. They had to cut a few players. The glaring ones were Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were two big contracts, and then also Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. And so they ended up trading Keenan Allen to the Bears, cutting Mike Williams, and then they kept both of the edge rushers and kind of restructured their contracts, which was pretty interesting. I feel like it makes sense because of it seems like they're focusing more on kind of building the trenches first, not necessarily like it's more of just a smart team building move. Like especially also with the number 5 pick, they took Joe Alt instead of taking a receiver too. They really went in on the trenches there for instead of taking Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. That being said, they did still get Ladd McConkey in the second, who I think will have a good effect right away. He has a wide open room there. And then besides that, they brought in Greg Roman as their OC and Joe Horitz as their GM, both from Baltimore, where his brother is head coach, of course.
Yeah, very familiar with the Baltimore system. You would think Harbaugh is, and also brought in J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. We know that the Harbaugh is like a great running. Both Harbaugh is like a big running attack. So we could see definitely that there, right? If they're building up the trenches.
For sure. They also brought in Bradley Bozeman at center because Corey Lindsey is probably going to retire here shortly. So Bozeman's also he was last on the Panthers, but he originally was on the Ravens. So there's familiarity there. And I think the big plan is just to have it so Herbert can be kept upright and he doesn't have to do everything. Like having a good run game, having a good O-line will help complement Herbert and allow him to make his crazy plays that he does when he's healthy. So I'm excited to see how they do because this year is pretty tough for them with the cap space. But like you said, everywhere Harbaugh has gone, they've succeeded right away. Like, and he's turned around programs too. Like when he went to Stanford, when he went to San Diego, those both completely turned around when he went there.
Yeah.
So, and then like San Francisco when he was there as well, it's like I could totally see it happen where they outperform and end up like a wild card or what have you. So I'm excited to see how they do. They got a lot of new players there, but ultimately it's going to come down to if Herbert's playing or not. So,
yeah, that's interesting. What do we think about the wide receiver depth here because of them losing big names like Mike Williams and Keenan Allen?
Yeah, so they have their
Harbaugh. Sorry to interrupt you, Tucker. But what does it say about Harbaugh that as a quarterback, earlier in the segment I said in the show I mentioned that bringing two his tools in with the wide receivers, maybe could be seen as enticing for a quarterback. But then when the quarterback's the head coach, the first thing he's shoring up is the offensive line and letting all of these receivers go. Is that kind of a tip saying, hey, we can get anybody open if we got time and can throw them the ball, or you need to be special to get open and we got to get the ball out quick to you.
That's the fun thing is the whole difference in philosophies. Like, and they both can work if they're executed right and you get the right guys.
What would you take, Tucker? What would you take?
I mean, I'd say receivers if you're going for short-term, trenches for long-term. That's my thinking. Like O-line takes a little bit more time to adjust, whereas receivers.
Another T-shirt: trenches for long-term. There you go. Ourlads, trenches for long-term.
World War I.
Like Dolphins. The Chargers aren't in a roster spot to be like winning right away on paper, whereas the Dolphins or the Eagles are. So that's why they're paying so much to receivers because they have it already. Everything else is good.
Well, I think the PFF has the Eagles as the number one offensive line too.
Yeah, the Eagles especially are known for they just every year draft O-line and D-line like crazy. That's what Howie Roseman does every year. Even if they have a stacked D-line, they still draft a D tackle every year. So Dolphins are more concerning with their O-line, but D-line they short up a lot here too with edge rushers that Miami did. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how like the different philosophies, how they're executed and who ends up doing better, But ultimately they're kind of on different timelines is what I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. Going back to the wide receiver depth here, some interesting names, I think, if you're a fantasy football player. Cornelius Johnson and Brendan Rice, both drafted in the 7th round, but could be interesting rookies to grab late in drafts because they could have an opportunity to play right away if Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnson don't step up, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And besides that, they brought in DJ Chark as sort of another guy to fill out that room, but they don't have much there. Like Darius Davis is a slot receiver, but he didn't play very much last year. He was kind of mainly just a return guy. That's what he was brought in for. So they certainly have room to make the roster. Palmer is good, but I think that he's not like he's more an ideal top backup sort of receiver, like number 4, like you'd like to have, where you can kind of move him at any spot. Quentin Johnston we're kind of wondering if he can step up here in his second year because the first year did not go well.
Did not do much his first year. Yeah, pretty invisible.
Yeah, so I think Chark was brought in sort of as insurance for Quentin Johnston, but then the others have plenty of room to try to make moves here over Palmer, and also Ryan McKee there too isn't necessarily a given.
Yeah. And looking at the Chargers building up their trenches, and Kamani Vidal is an interesting maybe rookie to pick up in Dynasty too. A 6th-round pick, but he's going to be playing behind Dobbins and Edwards, who have both had injury concerns in their history, and they're getting up there in age. So Vidal could be the future of that backfield. Is definitely the future of that backfield, right?
Yeah, if he shows to be good, but 6th-round pick usually are more risky to make a roster. But here it's like one of those spots where it's a clear kind of need that they have for depth, especially with the injury proneness of Dobbins. So he'll have plenty of room here as well, similar to Cornelius Johnson and Brendan Rice. It's just sort of the nature of those position groups right now.
Yeah. What do you think, Cory? Any other questions on the Chargers for Tucker on here?
No, I just really hope Brendan Rice comes out. I was always a childhood big fan of Jerry Rice. I'm rooting for Brendan to come out and be someone special. And I think he went to a great spot for that with Coach Harbaugh. He's a big fraternity type of a player and a big rah-rah guy. And I think Brendan's going to come out and work hard. That's the early reports that I've seen.
Yeah. And the odds makers in Vegas have the Chargers as a -105 to play beyond the regular season. So that is looking pretty good. They expect at least some level of success for Harbaugh in his first year. And obviously, as Tucker said, there's a lot of history to prove that is going to be the case. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining me and Cory and Tucker on the Ourlads Depth Chart Show. Just, keep in mind, before this episode, I typed in to ChatGPT, why are Ourlads Depth Charts considered the best? And it gave me 8 different reasons: comprehensive analysis, expert insights, regular updates, historical context, visual clarity, depth of information, independent source, and longevity and reputation. So look at that. Even ChatGPT, even artificial intelligence knows that Ourlads Depth Charts are the best. How do you feel about that, Tucker?
I want to get my name in there, but otherwise, I love the compliments from.
All right. Well, we'll have to make sure that ChatGPT knows that you are the Duke of Depth Charts. And we've also been joined by the Prince of Punters, Cory Henke. What's some knowledge you can leave us on, Cory?
I don't have any.
All right. Love that. Yeah, we'll be back next week, same time, same channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great weekend.